Let's move further afield now. The United States will head to the polls on Tuesday as the race to the White House enters the final stage. This year's election is taking place against the backdrop of a global pandemic, and infection rates in the United States are the highest in the world. Meanwhile, the country saw widespread protests following the death of George Floyd, highlighting the precarious state of race relations in the United States. So, what does the future of the United States look like? Joining us now from the US and in LA, to be exact, is Professor Mark Rosenberg. He is an assistant professor of international and public affairs at Columbia University's. Prof, good afternoon to you, South African time. And I want to go straight into the opinion piece that you wrote, where you speak about it's striking to see the United States in 2020 look so much like the failing state that was the late apartheid South Africa, albeit American scale and at American speed. Identify these parallels that you seek to draw between the US right now and what was a dying apartheid South Africa then.
Well, look, apartheid South Africa and contemporary South Africa and the contemporary United States are clearly very different countries, different economically, probably most in the most major sense, but different politically, different socially. However, there's a very important commonality, which is that America right now is going through a demographic transition from a white majority, and specifically a white Christian majority, to a more diverse population, and the white, previously dominant group is no longer has such a strong hold on social, political, and economic control in the country. And that's what's driving a lot of the instability in the United States today, which is very similar to late apartheid South Africa, where minority rule was coming undone, and as a result, we had significant social and political instability there. That is a similar theme to what is happening here. That the core driver of the protests this year, of some of the concerns unprecedented for the United States around political violence and institutional stability and contested elections and even civil war, which is very much unlikely, but nonetheless, the fact that we're talking about it in the United States is remarkable. Those risks are being driven by the fact that this society here is undergoing a transition from minority rule, which is a product of our demographics and also our political institutions, to majority, to a more majoritarian political landscape, and that's very similar to South Africa.
If President Donald Trump wins, what will become of this transition from a minority rule to a more majority rule?
I think it will signal the persistence of minority rule in the United States if Donald Trump wins very explicitly, in that the only way for him to win either legitimately is through a electoral outcome that greatly privileges white and particularly white rural votes over the popular vote. It's almost impossible for him to win the popular vote, but through our U.S. electoral institutions, it is possible for him to win the presidency by winning a majority of white votes, simply put. And as such, given a very large gap between the popular vote and the electoral outcome, a Trump victory will only sustain minority rule in the United States.
There are those, Prof, who are of the view that if it is a Biden win, black voters in America are not going to see much of a change. They're saying for over 150 years, black people, particularly who have been voting with the Democrats, have not really seen major change. So what change is going to come about if Joe Biden is elected, in particular for black, or what we commonly refer to as African Americans? Right.
Well, I understand that perspective, and certainly I think in the past 20 years that's borne out. I would, historically, the United States, remember, had something approaching apartheid as recently as the 1960s. under Jim Crow in the South. And it was really the Democratic Party that passed the Civil Rights Act and that ended that status quo. So I think historically, while I understand the disappointment, and I think it's largely structural, frankly, in terms of the American society, institutionalized racism, the way our economy is set up, the way our society is set up, it's not necessarily party specific. I think that is a serious issue. I think if when you look at the party's platforms and the various policy proposals and just their various orientations toward different groups, African Americans, Black Americans are most likely to do better under a Biden administration than the Trump administration, just based on their orientation. But I don't think we're going to see rapid change in either case.
Prof, as we edge closer to Tuesday, the U.S. goes into this election amid a global pandemic. The U.S. has the highest mortality figures. It also has the highest infection rates. COVID-19, talk to us about the kind of impact that it's going to have in determining who becomes president.
I think it's going to have a major impact. Look, our own models, in addition to being a professor, I'm the CEO of a technology company, and we model called GeoQuant, and we model political outcomes. And our models had Trump winning the election, in fact, as early as early 2020. Now our models show a clear Biden win. And I think the social and economic fallout from the pandemic is a core driver of that outcome, if that indeed comes to bear. I think in general it is very difficult for an incumbent government to win re-election amid significant social and economic upheaval in the country they're governing. And sometimes it's as simple as that. So I think it will have a significant impact. I'm not sure, it's very hard to predict on the other side of the election the path of COVID-19, both because of uncertainty around a vaccine, as well as the various epidemiological aspects of COVID. But I do think the two candidates have very different plans. And so management from the state will be more effective under a Biden administration should that come to bear.
Yeah. Perhaps as a final question to you, Prof. A week before this election takes place, a Reuters Ipsos opinion poll showing that Biden is leading Trump by 10% nationally. But there is also a caution there to say the numbers become tighter in battleground states, and that will essentially determine which way this election goes. Talk to us about the uncertainty, but importantly, let's perhaps focus the discussion around these battleground states. How important are they going to be as a decider?
Yeah, extremely important. Again, that's the nature of our electoral system. That's part of, to the earlier point, the way in which minority rule is sustained in this country is the electoral college, the existence of these, quote, battleground states, where because of the way of our electoral system, you can lose the popular vote, you can be down 10% in the national polls, and still win an election. And so I think that's very important. It is certainly the prime source of uncertainty in the election. It is certainly likely that Trump can still win the election. And if he does, again, it will be, to the earlier point, because of the overrepresentation in our political system for largely white rural Americans that have a higher portion in these battleground states than they do in other states. And so that is ultimately the heart of the matter.
Yeah. And if Trump does lose, will he accept the outcome? Because that's another important question that has been asked, particularly in the lead up to what is called the presidential debate. Exactly.
I don't think he will rhetorically accept the election. I don't think that necessarily matters in the United States in terms of institutional turnover. I do think it will introduce significant uncertainty and instability into our political system. And again, that is highly unusual. I spent most of my career, frankly, as an Africa analyst, and these were concerns around forecasting political stability in African countries, but historically never in the United States. So it's quite remarkable. I do think the institutional framework will hold such that there will be a transition of power should Trump lose the election. But I think the interim period is going to be highly unstable.
Mark Rosenberg, thank you very much for your time. He is the Assistant Professor of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University. Thanks indeed for your time and your insights, sir.